The Last Adventure. Chapter 1. A Cold, Rainy Day. It was a cold, rainy day in Kinsville, so cold, in fact, that the rain had almost turned to snow. The sidewalks were filled with puddles and slush, and the streets of the town were nearly empty. Since business was rather slow, Artie Fact decided it was the perfect day to clean out the back room of his curio shop. As he pushed back the curtain that led to the bedroom, he couldn't believe how much stuff he had accumulated. Gems, artifacts, pictures, and portraits, memorabilia from all of his great adventures. He had just begun sifting through a box marked Rare Gems when he heard the familiar jingle of the curio shop's welcome bell. "Hello," Artie called. "I'll be right out. I'm cleaning the back room." "Don't worry about it, Uncle Artie. I'll just let myself in." Artie heard his nephew race toward the back room. Sparky flew through the curtain and flung his rain hat onto the floor. "Hey, Uncle Artie," he said, patting Artie on the back. Sparky was quite a sight. His boots were muddy, his raincoat was drippy, and his fur was matted. "Where in Webkinz world have you been?" Artie asked, handing his nephew some paper towel. "You're tracking mud all over my floor." Sparky knelt down to start cleaning up the boot prints. "I was on an adventure," Sparky grinned. "That's exciting," Artie smiled. "Yeah," Sparky agreed, "with Doug the dog." Artie's smile turned into a frown. "What's wrong, Uncle?" Sparky asked. "Nothing," Artie said, shaking his head. "It's all ancient history now." Chapter 2. Ancient History. Sparky sprang to his feet and darted over to his uncle. "What's ancient history, Uncle Artie? Did something happen between you and Doug? What happened, Uncle Artie? What happened? Tell me, I really want to know." Sparky looked curiously at his uncle. Artie shook his head. "No, Sparky, you're friends with Doug. Anything that happened in the past has nothing to do with that." "But I need to know," Sparky said. "Doug said something once about you guys being pals, so close you were almost brothers. How come you're not friends now?" Artie sighed a big sigh and sat down on an Egyptian vanity chair. "Doug and I simply don't agree on certain things, Sparky," Artie explained. "Roberta and I don't agree on lots of things, but we're still friends," Sparky pointed out. "It's different," Artie said. "You and Roberta probably agree on the important things, right?" Sparky thought about this. "You mean what kind of ice cream is best or where to catch the brightest glow bugs?" Artie smiled. "Sort of," he nodded. Sparky looked more confused than ever. "Why don't you just tell me what happened?" Sparky suggested. "I really want to know what made you and Doug stop being friends." Artie sighed again. There was no other way to explain it. He simply had to tell the story. "Sit down, Sparky," Artie said. "This may take a minute." Chapter 3. Pals for Life. "A long time ago, when I was even younger than you," Artie said, smiling at Sparky, "I had a best friend, and that best friend was none other than Doug the dog. My mom and Doug's mom met when we were just tiny little puppies, and we hit it off right away. We were very similar and very different all at the same time. We were similar because we loved to go on adventures, search for treasures, and collect things. In fact, Doug loved to collect one thing in particular. Gems," Sparky interrupted. "That's right." Artie smiled. "Gems, and I loved to collect, well, everything. From the time we were very, very small, we went on adventures. They started out in our backyards and moved to the field near our houses and finally to Webkinz world at large. Exciting things would always happen when we'd go on our adventures. There was the time we ran into the gigantic mountain Zangas. We thought we'd never get out of that situation. And the time we got lost for 3 days in Kinsville Forest. That was scary, but we were able to map out areas that no Webkinz had ever been to before. We always talked about writing a book together. We were a good team, Doug and me. Well, for the most part." Chapter 4. One Thing in Particular. Doug and I had our own special club, the Adventure Dogs, and we usually got along like brothers. Whenever we went on adventures, any gems we found would always go to Doug. Any artifacts would be mine. Doug wanted to find all the gems in Webkinz world so he could have the biggest, best collection of all. Doug believed that because he knew the most about gems, and he loved them more than anyone else in Webkinz world, that they should be his. This was the one thing we really didn't agree about. I like to share my artifacts and let other Webkinz start their own collections. Sometimes I would give my artifacts to friends. I just didn't see why I should keep all the artifacts for myself. It's the reason I opened the curio shop, to share the wealth. Doug, on the other hand, kept every single gem we ever found in a polished oak box under his bed. The more Doug and I would go on adventures, the more he'd want to find gems. The more gems we found, the more he wanted. He never had enough. I was getting worried about him. He'd go anywhere, do anything. As long as he could get the gem, he was happy. I didn't like seeing my friend so focused on one thing. I missed the Doug that used to like to go on adventures just to have fun. When Doug asked me to go on another journey together, I got a funny feeling in my stomach. Turns out, my stomach was right. Chapter 5. The Big Adventure. Doug and I had planned to leave on a Thursday. The adventure was supposed to take us into uncharted areas of Webkinz, places that had remained untouched for hundreds of years. We didn't know what we'd find there, but we were hoping for something amazing. It was going to be a 2-week trek, a dangerous voyage. No one knew what kind of perilous situations we might face. The day before we were scheduled to leave, I packed my knapsack full of everything I felt was important. My atlas, good hiking boots, rope, hard hat, notebook, flashlight, and lots of canned food. Doug dropped by to see how things were going. I asked him what he packed, and he told me, a flashlight, tinned food, and bags for all the wonderful things we'd find, and hopefully, said Doug, gems. Lots and lots of gems. When he left that day, he said something that really stuck with me. Artie, this adventure is going to be one we never forget. I'm so excited, I don't think I can wait for tomorrow. That night, before I fell asleep, I set my alarm clock for 5 a.m. sharp. I was feeling pretty excited myself. Chapter 6. Left Behind. When I woke up on Thursday morning, I hopped out of bed and got dressed in record time. Doug and I were supposed to meet at 6 o'clock in the town square. I grabbed my pack, and as I headed out, the sun was just peeking out from behind the clouds. It was a good day for hiking. Webkinz shimmered in the haze in the distance. I sat on the edge of the town square's stone fountain and waited for Doug, and waited, and waited. After 3 hours, it occurred to me he had gone ahead without me. When he had said he couldn't wait to go on the adventure, well, he must have meant it. So I set off for Webkinz. I walked and walked, a bit faster than usual, expecting that I'd find Doug at some point. After walking for the entire day, I became worried. I couldn't imagine what had happened to Doug. As I set up camp that night, I vowed to forego the adventure. The only thing I wanted to find was Doug. I walked for days, following the basic route Doug and I had planned to take. The entire time, I didn't see any sign of him. No burnt-out fires, no broken twigs, nothing. He was never there. On the 7th night, I was just about ready to set up camp when I heard a strange noise. It sounded like howling. My ears perked up and my thoughts began to race. It must be Doug. He must be hurt. I ran through the pitch-black forest with only my weak flashlight beam to guide my way. It was too dangerous to light my oil lamp. I stumbled and tripped as the noise grew closer and closer. As I broke through a final tangle of weeds, I gasped. All around me, the cool air glittered. It was by far the most gorgeous sight I have ever seen. Chapter 7. Lighting Up the Night. I put my flashlight away and lit my oil lamp. It was much brighter and good for examining things. As the lamp lit up the night, I could see 5 rocky entrances surrounding me. The noise seemed to be coming from one entrance. As I walked closer to it, I could see a sign that read, Howling Horse Mine. What was this strange place? I ducked as I walked slowly into the rocky cave. Inside, there were stalactites and stalagmites poking up and down. Peeking out from all corners were gems, beautiful, sparkling gems, mostly blue. As I looked around, I realized that the sound I heard was coming from a round crater near the entrance. As the wind blew across it, it made a funny noise that sounded like howling. My heart sank when I realized I hadn't found Doug. I really wished he was with me at that moment. To see so many gems would have made him so happy. Bit by bit, I wandered from cave to cave and examined each one. The last one I looked into was brighter than the others. The gems seemed to be crystalline. They reflected the light of my lantern and made the cave sparkle like a diamond. As I entered that cave, something caught my eye. A scroll and a crown were perched carefully on top of a stone that almost looked like a pedestal. I unrolled the scroll gingerly to reveal a map. A very old map, for that matter, that showed each mine and its name. I picked up the crown, and I felt a surge of something I can only describe as magic. It filled me with wonder. I had found something so beautiful, something so precious. I knew what I had to do. I had to share it with Webkinz world. Chapter 8. Heading home. I was so excited I could barely sleep that night. I knew I needed my strength because I had a long hike ahead of me. I wasn't even sure where I was. I had gone off the beaten path when I'd thought I heard Doug. I knew I'd have to be very careful to map my journey back to Kinsville so I'd know precisely where the mines were. During my whole hike home, I kept an eye out for Doug. I couldn't wait to share the good news, the mines, the gems. I knew he'd be thrilled. And I couldn't wait to announce the discovery to the whole town. Everyone would get a chance to visit the mines. They'd just have to visit the curio shop and let me know they were leaving. And then they could go once a day to be fair. Surprisingly, the hike back didn't take too long at all. It seems my detour brought me closer to Kinsville. As I walked down the main street of Kinsville, Dr. Quack approached me. "Artie," he said, "how's Doug doing?" I guess I looked pretty confused. You know, after his sprained ankle. How's he feeling? A knot formed in the pit of my stomach. Sprained ankle? I gulped. So he hadn't gone ahead after all. I knew I had to get to Doug's house, and fast. I knocked on Doug's door using our special adventure dog's knock. I heard shuffling, and then the door opened very slowly. Doug was wearing an elastic bandage and holding a set of crutches. "Doug, what happened?" I asked. Doug frowned. "You tell me," he said, narrowing his eyes. "What happened to you?" Chapter 9. Mine, all mine. "I went on our adventure," I said. "I thought you went ahead without me, so I thought I'd catch up, and then I wandered through the forest for days looking for you, but you weren't there, so I would never leave without you." Doug frowned harder. "That's not what best friends do. I slipped on a gem and I sprained my ankle. I've been here waiting for you to get back." "I'm sorry," I said, "but I have news that will make it up to you. Hold out your paw." I took out a small bag from my pack. I had carefully chipped out one gem from each mine for Doug. I dumped the gems into Doug's outstretched paw. His eyes grew very large. "Where did you get these?" he gasped. "From the 5 secret mines I found. I brought you 1 gem from each," I explained. "There are only 4 gems here," Doug commented. "I guess you lost one." Sure enough, there was a hole in the small bag. The Webkinz diamond I brought back was nowhere to be found. "No matter," I continued quickly. "The point is, I've found these mines, Doug. They are the most beautiful things I've ever seen." A slow smile spread across Doug's face. Come in," he said, holding the door open. "Tell me all about them. This news definitely makes up for you going without me." Doug and I sat down at his kitchen table. "Tell me everything," he said, shaking my paw. "Artifact, the great adventurer." I grinned. I told Doug all about my trip, trying to find him. The weird sound that came from the one mine. The dark night. Everything. "I can't wait to see my mines." Doug smiled. "I can't wait to mine them and add all of those gems to my collection." "Oh, Artie, thank you for finding those mines for me." "They're not for you," I corrected him. "Those mines belong to everyone." Chapter 10. Best friends. "Who else knows about them?" Doug asked. "No one," I said. "I haven't told anyone yet. I was going to call a town meeting today." "Don't do it," Doug pleaded. "Just let me have them, Artie. They're rightfully mine. Every adventure we've ever been on, I've gotten the gems, you've gotten the artifacts, right?" "Right," I agreed. "Every time I find an artifact, who gets it?" he asked. "I do," I admitted, "but I also bring you gems all the time." "Exactly," Doug said. "And this time should be no different. You found gems, they go to me. That's how it's always been, Artie. It's what our friendship has been all about, helping each other out." "But this is different," I said. "The mines felt so magical. It's something I need to share with everyone in Kinsville. There are just too many gems for one Webkinz." Doug frowned. "Think about it, Artie. No one else appreciates gems as much as I do. No one else likes them as much as me. Just tell me where they are. Give the mines to me." Doug, I began, I think, first you go and take the adventure without me. Now this? Doug crossed his arms. If I had been with you, we would have found the gems together. Then you would have let me have them all. I shook my head. No, I would have told you to share them. It's the right thing to do. Doug looked at me angrily. The right thing to do is to give them to your very best friend, the one you left behind. The one who loves gems. That's the right thing to do, Artie. I stood up and picked up my pack. I've got to go, I said. Don't do it, Artie, Doug warned. If you don't give those mines to me, I'll know exactly how important our friendship really is to you. I watched Doug clutch the 4 gems I had brought back. I knew I had a very hard decision to make. I left Doug sitting in his kitchen and went back to the curio shop to think. Chapter 11. A Real Gem. I thought and thought for hours. On one hand, I knew Doug would love the mines, and if I gave them to him, we could still be friends. On the other hand, I knew how much everyone would enjoy mining and how much excitement it would bring to Kinsville. If I shared the mines with everyone in town, Doug would be angry, very, very angry. But everyone else would be happy. And if Doug saw how happy everyone else was, well, he'd eventually have to understand why I had to share, and everyone's happiness would rub off onto Doug. It made perfect sense to me. As I set the crown of wonder and the map on the counter at the curio shop, I made up my mind. The mines were mine to share. I called a town meeting that evening. As I stood on the podium and explained about the gems and the adventure and that everyone could visit the mines once a day, I saw Webkinz smile and laugh and start imagining all the fun they'd have looking for gems. I got swept away in the moment. If you manage to find one of each type of gem, I said, you can trade them in and I'll make you a wonderful crown to wear, a crown of wonder. Everyone clapped and cheered. Well, almost everyone. At the very back of the crowd was Doug, propped up against the wall, holding his crutches and looking madder than I'd ever seen anyone before. I tried to talk to him after the meeting was over, but before I could reach him, he was gone. Chapter 12. Open for business. Doug stormed off that night, and I didn't hear from him or see him for a month. One day, while I was at the curio shop and a large crowd waited to go mining, I saw Doug enter. He caught my eye and edged his way to the counter. I want to go to the mines, he said through gritted teeth. I noticed he was holding a large sack. What's that for? I asked. The gems. Time for me to get what I deserve. I want to go mining. Now, Artie. I frowned. No, Doug, I said. You said the mines belong to everyone. Doug stomped his foot. That includes me. I shook my head. No, it doesn't. You can't go mining, Doug, I said. I just can't trust you. Doug glared. If you don't let me go to the mines, I will never speak to you again, he threatened. I couldn't believe it. A lifetime of friendship had come down to Doug's obsession with gems. I'm sorry, I said, and I truly was. Sorry that he didn't understand why I couldn't let him go mining. Sorry that our friendship was over. Sorry that Doug was so unhappy. I was sorry. But I wasn't sorry for not letting him go mining. I knew I made the right decision. As Doug left that day, I hoped he'd notice the happy faces of everyone around him. I hoped he'd come back and say, I understand why you shared the mines. If he ever said that, I would have let him go mining. But he never did. And he never has. And he kept his promise. We've never spoken to each other again. Chapter 13. A Small Token. Wow, Uncle Artie, Sparky said, his eyes wide. That's so sad. Artie nodded. It is, I suppose. Sometimes it happens, though, Sparky. Friends change, you change, and sometimes you have to go your separate ways. My teacher says that you just have to say sorry to fix a fight, Sparky mentioned. But Sparky, I'm not sorry that he can't go mining, Artie said. He just doesn't understand how to share. He still thinks all the gems should be his, and that's not fair. Sparky nodded slowly. So you'll never be friends again? Artie shook his head. Nope. But I'm Doug's friend, Sparky said. I love going on adventures with him. That's great, Artie said, patting his nephew's head. Doug is a great adventurer. He can teach you lots of interesting stuff. Sparky hesitated. You don't mind if I hang out with him? No, Artie said, smiling, not at all. Sparky sighed. In fact, Artie said, I need you to do me a favor and take something to Doug. Artie opened the box labeled Rare Gems. He rifled around inside and pulled out something small and crystal. Here, Artie said. He handed Sparky a shiny Webkinz diamond. This is something I owe Doug. Something I should have given him a long time ago. Sparky looked at it and looked at his uncle. Thanks, Uncle Artie, Sparky smiled. Doug will love it. Artie smiled back. I know.